Ask me no questions and I will tell you no lies. Pork broth is my least favorite broth to make. So simple enough. Took the bones out of the bag, put them in the roaster oven, filled it up with water, and I let it cook for 2 solid days. Then I let it cool, and by doing that, all of the fat comes to the top and it's a lot easier to skim off. Depending on the type of meat that you are doing, sometimes that fat really hardens and you have to actually break it away. This may have been that way, except I've had it sit on the counter at room temperature for probably 2 hours at this point. And I can skim it away, but it isn't like I don't have to break it like I would with a beef stock that I do. I'm going to show you what this looks like, but I almost feel like it has to come with like this big warning ahead of time. It doesn't look pretty, just is what it is. You know, you boil a bunch of bones and pork tends to be a little fatty at that. It's just not going to look pretty, but I'll show you what it looks like. That way, if you're doing it yourself at home, you don't question if this is how it's supposed to look. So you can see how that fat is at the surface, and I was able to pretty much just sweep it away. So I'm going to skim it off using the same strainer that I used when I was rendering down my lard. I'm just going to kind of, it's like a fishnet is what it reminds me of. And so I'm just going to scoop that along in here, removing as much of it as possible. It's going to go through a second straining process that you will see here in a minute. And once I get that completely strained off, I'm going to get it heated back up. That way I can get it into my jars and into my canner. It doesn't matter what type of broth you were doing in terms of chicken, beef, pork, or vegetable. I believe they all can for the same amount of time. I'm going to double check that, because now that I'm saying that out loud, I'm thinking, I don't know if I should have even said that. I need to double check. But it does not process for very long, considering the amount of time meat itself has to process for, just the broth itself. 20 minutes or 25 minutes typically is processing time for pints and quarts. I will process this in pints because I don't do anything with pork broth that would require an entire quart. I don't use it for soups like I would a chicken stock or beef stock. I generally only use my pork stock for maybe like rice, cooking down some sort of a vegetable, for beans, just small side dishes usually is how I use it. I think, if memory is serving me correctly, I think I only do pork broth once a year too, because I do it whenever my hogs come in. And I have a couple jars still on top of my shelf there in the pantry, so I don't even go through all of it in a year. But I do like having it because I do use it. Throughout this journey, you and me together, coming along, seeing what I make for my family, living off of the pantry that I've built, you'll see at some point in time, of course, how I use my pork broth. So let's get this strained up. I'm gonna just use a measuring cup here, and I'm just going to strain the broth. All of the bones, meat, and fat are still in here. This is probably the main reason I don't like making my own broth. Although I can't ever picture myself purchasing broth from the store again, because you basically are already purchasing everything that you need to make broth when you purchase whatever meat you're buying. Just requires a little bit more work, obviously, but the straining part of it, oh, it's my least favorite. I have 9 hot jars here. I have my funnel. Then I have this strainer here, and it's a very, very fine mesh. It's one of my favorite kitchen gadgets that I have. I use it a lot, actually. Even though I strained it in my flour sack towel, I'm still going to do one last strain when it goes into my jar. My broth here does still have some fat on top, so there's a good chance some of that will then cling to this strainer as well, which is nice. And I don't know, that's the measuring cup I want to use, but we'll see. And I'm just going to get them strained up here. I like using a cup because a ladle can take forever. The patience I have watching people slowly ladle broth into a jar, I'm like, oh, just use a measuring cup. We don't have all day. Same that you do with every other broth is 1 inch of headspace. You don't have to debubble. It is pure liquid, no sense of debubbling. There's nothing there that's getting air trapped. So you might be wondering, what on earth do you need pork broth for? I do pork broth once a year when I get my 2 hog order that you had already seen. I get a ton of bones, and of course, what best to do with that than, of course, make some pork broth. I will use pork broth anytime I'm making a pork roast, of course. You certainly can use vegetable or chicken in place of it. That's what I did years and years and years ago. But no need to do that now when you have pork broth. I will use it for certain bean and rice dishes. And because it really is not something I use a whole heck of a lot of like I do beef and chicken, that's why I don't worry about keeping more on the shelf than whatever this here will give me. I do not add, I've said this before, and you know, I'm sorry, I don't remember which video it was, but I don't add vegetables to my stock. And the reason I don't do that is because, that one's too full, is because one, I don't want vegetables taking up space in my freezer. Years ago, when I got started with making my own stock, I did just that. I would peel carrots and wash them first. Peel carrots, save the shavings, wash your onions, save the skins, and and so on and so forth. And then it would be in my freezer in a baggie. But I found those overwhelmed my freezer quicker than the carcass and meat and bones of any other meat to go alongside whatever stock I was making. And when it came time, it was almost like too much. I'm like, I don't want to put that much into the stock that I'm making. And so then there's still some left over. And I got to the point where I started to really think about it. And I'm like, currently, this could change down the line, and I then might change the way I do my stock. But I'm thinking, right now, I don't take my broth, open it, and drink it. So I don't need the additional nutrients that vegetables could provide me in that broth. Whatever I'm cooking using the broth has vegetables, more than likely, has those additional nutrients that I'm adding there. So it almost felt like an unnecessary step. I got to where then I was gardening and wanting to compost. And then now we have hens who, to some degree, are kind of like a pig. They'll eat a lot of my vegetable scraps, besides onions, of course. So I don't see a need to reserve that, take up space in my freezer to cook down for 2 days, hoping there's any sort of nutrition left in it. So I stopped doing that years ago. And now it's literally just the meat and the nutrition that provides me, and the flavor, of course. And then I rely on whatever I'm making to add that additional nutrition. Flavor-wise, I'll just be honest with you, I don't have a rag. I've never tasted my broth and just went, oh, that is so good. Broth is broth to me. It's nothing that to get excited over, in my opinion. All right, this is very fatty, so I definitely recommend a good wipe down with vinegar. When I first started this video with you, it was actually a couple of days ago. I did, I did the intro, told you what we were doing, all of that, and then as life would have it, I ended up not getting back around to doing it, so I had to go into the fridge, and the fat on top definitely hardened up a little bit, and it was a lot easier to scrape off that fat on top. But there's still quite a bit left even after making that attempt. So there's definitely ways to go about making sure you don't get a lot of fat into your jars. You can use one of those fat separators.
I'll be honest with you, I do not have any success using those. I'm not quite sure how they work, but I don't know, it just doesn't seem to work well for me. So I got rid of it, and I kind of just go through a multi-process step of trying to strain to keep my jars from having a ton of fat into it. It's about really the only time I would ever want to use one anyway. Getting my clean lids on top. I'm using Superb for my regular mouth jars. I do have a few wide mouth in my other canner because I ran out of the regular mouth jars. Broth I like to definitely use my regular mouth for, because you know, it just pours out nicely. I don't have to worry about trying to get things out of a more narrow opening. So it's definitely a good opportunity to use regular mouth. If you're going to be brand new to canning and you're going to start off purchasing jars and everything, just buy all wide mouth. Honestly, there's no reason to have both. There's a lot of reason, in my opinion, to have wide mouth. There really isn't any reason I would choose to have regular mouth. There's a lot of reasons I would choose the wide mouth over a regular mouth. So something to think about. I've sort of gathered and collected jars from all sorts of places throughout the years. So I just sort of take what I find. But when I purchase jars, unless they are sold out, I generally try and just purchase wide mouth anymore. Okay, these are gonna go into the canner. Those are looking really pretty. Definitely have to label your stock, because I wouldn't know if this was chicken or pork by the time it's all said and done and put on my shelf. I was not sure how many jars I was gonna need, and do you know, I think I might end up only needing to run one canner. But with what I have left here, I can do my one canner double stacked just fine. So I don't need two canners today after all. What I like to do when I do have my double canner, stacking canner, to keep my jars hot, I keep the water that I currently have in the jar in the canner, and I'll set my jars here on one of my mats. But I keep the water in it. I don't empty it until I know whether or not I need to use it, because it helps to keep the jar hot for longer. This way it doesn't cool down too much and my jars don't go into shock. In case you're wondering, another popular jar brand, I don't know if they're still in production or not. I've never looked into it. The jars that I have, I purchased from a sale of a grandma who passed away, and her grandson was cleaning out the basement, and so I have a lot of collector type of jars as well. But Kerr is another brand of jars besides Ball that could be available. And then you've also seen me use Wex, which is, I think, a European type of brand jar, not American. Those are beautiful. Those are so beautiful. I wish all my jars could be Wex, but they're expensive. Absolutely expensive. Plus, they're so pretty for gifting, but I also wouldn't want to gift them. So I bought two different types of sets, and that's all I've ever done, because I thought, yeah, it's kind of silly to spend money like that on a jar that sits on my shelf, and of course I could admire it, but I wouldn't gift it to somebody because they're so expensive. So it's one of those, you know, if I won the lottery, I wouldn't tell anybody, but there would be signs kind of a thing. I also don't add salt to my broths because sure enough, whatever I'm cooking will have plenty of salt and seasonings with it. There's a lot of advantages to drinking bone broth, and I know that, but I can't do it. These are going to process 20 minutes because they're pints. If they were quarts, it would be 25. I will reference my canning book just to make sure that my memory is correct. Oh my, I'm really making a mess. Do you see that? Oh! Well, there's just no way about it. I'm gonna have to lift that up. Watch this jar here. Huh. What was I doing? Clearly not paying attention. Looked like I still had a ton of space left. I don't know what I was looking at. Oh well. Don't cry over spilt stock. Over spilt broth. No big deal. All right, this one, I don't know if it'll give me a full jar or not. If not, I'll top it off with water. Nope, we're good. Got a couple tablespoons left. Not worried about it. So that's why I like using this extra strainer. Even though I've strained it already, it definitely gets cooked up. So I recommend that. So now that the garden is put to bed, it's winter, well, technically it's fall, I guess. Feels like winter. We don't have as much canning to do, but there are still, projects you can do intermittently throughout the year. After Thanksgiving, between that period of Thanksgiving and Christmas, I will be doing some beans. So this here took up all of the jars on my shelf, aside from some of the wide mouth there that I took out of the canner. But within the next week or two, I will be opening up quite a bit more jars for dinners and whatnot. And once I need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I only need 3 more wide mouth pints to make a full canner's worth. And so I will be doing some beans. My kidney beans I will be doing, I have lots of quarts still on my shelf, so I don't need to worry about that. I like to do kidney beans in quarts because I basically use kidney beans for chili. And when I make chili, I always use at least 1 quart. So my other type of beans, generally I like to use pint size. And that gets done throughout the winter as well. So you still have some projects. So if you're getting into canning and it's, the end of summer, nothing more is coming out of the garden, don't tuck your canner away where it isn't accessible, because you still will find reasons to use it, like homemade stock, canning your own beans, canning meat. Those are all the things that I do a lot throughout winter. And I'll do it, of course, throughout summer and spring as needed. But I generally try and do a good amount of it throughout the winter, so I can focus on other things come summertime.